Presentation, I chose to connect Hamlet and Divergent through the Marxist lens. Now let's get into Hamlet and Divergent, rising against the crown and capital. The unweeded gardens, York's skull, and Ophelia's flowers are symbols I will explore in Hamlet. The gravedigger shows Hamlet York's skull in Act 5, Scene 1, and as a child Hamlet knew York as a court jester, and only when he holds his skull does Hamlet come to understand that death does not only favor the poor, but also favors everyone he cares about too. Hamlet then goes on to consider if he has lived a fulfilled life and has come to the conclusion that death will ultimately make everyone equal regardless of their status while living. The skull will serve as a mori for Hamlet. Act 4, Scene 5 shows how Ophelia's father's passing, Hamlet's rejection, and the social pressures she endured drove her to end her own life. Ophelia conveys her emotions through each of the flowers she carries during the play. She is seen with the rue and the fennel. The fennel stands for her infidelity and grief, and she feels sorrow for the death of her father, but she is just as devastated by Hamlet's rejection. The fennel represents adultery through the shallowness and unfaithfulness seen in the court. This is seen by the king's death and Gertrude marrying Claudius right after. The rue represents her remorse and resentment, and she regrets her unfulfilled love for Hamlet and her inability to stop her father's death. Through the injustices she has experienced, such as being treated differently than men, her father's passing, and Hamlet's rejection, rue embodies resentment. Rue is used in cleansing rituals and is considered to be purifying in religious contexts. Ophelia's suicide symbolizes her release from the weight that she carries while she was alive. The unweeded garden symbolizes the decay and corruption of Denmark. Both the king and the garden can be represented as rank and gross in nature. Normally, gardens are seen as tranquil, peaceful, and full of harmony, which is represented by the Garden of Eden in the Bible. In the kingdom, the garden is seen as rotten and diseased. The garden is abandoned and is left to decay, much like how the kingdom is on the verge of falling apart due to the loss of its king. Corruption can be represented by the weeds showing their greed for more space in the garden and the need to overtake what was once orderly and pure. This is like how Claudius shows corruption by wanting to take over the kingdom by killing the king. His selfish acts will then affect the entire kingdom and lead to his death. Moving on to class structure, in the court there are classes of hierarchy which show your social status. The most important ranking would be the upper class and royalty, which includes Hamlet, Gertrude, and Claudius. Next are the nobility and court officials, which includes Polonius, who advises the king and is the highest ranking in the court, and his children Laertes and Ophelia. The military includes Fortinbras and the soldiers. Fortinbras is a prince and is also a military leader. The middle class includes Rosencrantz and Guildenstern, who are both hired by Hamlet to spy on Claudius as they rely on the court's power for their lives. Finally, there's the working class, which includes the gravediggers and clowns, and they are manual workers that show that even through their differences in the court, they will be equal in death. Now moving on to Hamlet's class structure and struggle. The play Hamlet shows the different lifestyles of the classes, but then shows how everyone is tied together through their inevitable death. This is shown in the quote, "When you ask this question next, say a gravedigger. The house he makes will last till doomsday." This is Act 5, Scene 1, line 55 to line 56. This line sheds light on how the gravediggers are laborers for the dead as well as the living by creating homes for the dead, and they are employed by the living. The graves are permanent homes for the dead, and since the gravediggers are hired by the royal court, it shows how death affects everyone no matter their status. The graves are made respecting the dead and last forever, like death or till doomsday. Next is Hamlet's rebellion and his decision to murder the king to avenge his father. Hamlet is conversing with Rosencrantz and Guildenstern about how to catch Claudius with the evidence of murdering the king. They come up with an idea in the quote, "The play's the thing and wherein I'll catch the conscience of the king." And this is Act 2, Scene 2, line 519 to line 592. After the visitation of the king's ghost, Hamlet is told Claudius killed his father and how it was done. In Hamlet's play, The Murder of Gonzago, the scene in the mousetrap shows how the murderer poured poison in the victim's ear. When Claudius left because he was uncomfortable, Hamlet was then certain that the ghost was right and that Claudius wanted his father's power. Now moving on to Hamlet's alienation and how he stands out from his kingdom. After his father's death, Hamlet feels as though he doesn't belong and that no one will understand his thoughts completely. This is seen in the quote, "Denmark's a prison." This is seen in Act 2, Scene 2, line 240. This quote suggests that Hamlet feels trapped and that his mental torture is to be misunderstood by everyone around him. This makes him appear alienated because of the burdens of his father's death, Claudius's betrayal of killing the king, and the king's ghost tasking him with avenging his death. Having no one to tell about his problems, Hamlet feels very isolated and alone. Now moving on to Divergent and its symbols, which I chose are the choosing ceremony, factions, and Triss's tattoo. The choosing ceremony is where the initiates pick which faction they will become for the rest of their lives based on an aptitude test. The aptitude test gives them different scenarios in a simulation and judges what faction they should belong to for the results. The test results are meant to help guide this choice, but choosing a faction different from the one's result or family, like Triss does, is considered rare and controversial. The test is designed to access a person's dominant traits when determine which of the 5 factions they belong to. The aptitude test represents the assimilation of the factions and how people have to be grouped together in order for society to work. The factions were created as a response to humanity's destructive behaviors, and each of the factions represent a different virtue believed to prevent in conflict. The factions are different groups with specialized traits of what people can do to fully express themselves, and this symbolizes self-expression. Each faction provides a clear set of rules, values, and duties that its members are expected to embrace fully. An example of this is when Triss had to burn her abnegation clothes in order to be in Dauntless to forget her past. The 3-bird tattoo on Triss's collarbone represents her family members, her mother, father, and brother, who she feels connected to despite leaving abnegation for Dauntless. Triss's tattoo symbolizes her new self-identity in Dauntless and how she left her old self behind. In abnegation, she had to be pure, reserved, and selfless and helped others in any way, shape, or form, but in Dauntless, she can express herself fully and be whoever she wants to be. Moving on to Divergent's class structure, there's Abnegation, Dauntless, Erudite, Amity, and Candor. The factions are 5 groups used to represent different aspects that make up one's character. Abnegation is selfless and symbolizes simplicity, humility, kindness, and the sacrifices that are made for others. When watching the movie, the viewer can see that Triss's house is very bland and boring, and it has no light and no mirrors, which they see as too selfish, because having the electricity would be wasting energy for others, and having the mirror takes time away from other people. Next is Dauntless, and they are brave and they represent courage, strength, and impulsive behaviors. We can see their impulsive behaviors through their way of transportation, which is the train, and that's very dangerous. Next is Erudite, and it's knowledgeable and represents intelligence. Amity is peaceful and symbolizes harmony, and Candor is honest and they represent truth, fairness, and transparency. Being divergent means that you have multiple traits and belong to many factions. Moving on to class structure and struggle, when Triss and her brother chose their new factions, they had to decide whether they belonged in abnegation from their hometown or somewhere else. In the line, the future belongs to those who know where they belong. When we leave this room, you will be fully fledged members of society. Factions before blood. And this is at 17 minutes and 50 seconds. This line shows how important identity is to the factions because it is a full commitment and there is no going back. Factions before blood shows that when you choose and have a faction that you fully commit to, you have to be loyal to it before family ties. By doing this, you have to cut off all connections to your past. This goes against human nature because you want to be close to those you know the most, which is a human weakness that they feel like they have to overcome. Next is Triss's rebellion and how she chose Dauntless. When Triss chose Dauntless, she knew that she was going to be a protector, but she didn't realize to what extent. This is seen in the quote, "I need to know I can count on you to enforce the law, even when it's been broken by someone close to you." And this is at 1 hour, 22 minutes, and 10 seconds. By enforcing the law, she is going to have to do things she doesn't always agree with, but because she chose Dauntless, she has to act like one. This quote symbolizes the law and how it's not lenient with rules and the consequences. Lastly is Triss's alienation and her being divergent. When Triss's mom visits her in Dauntless territory, she warns Triss about the dangers of being divergent. When she says, "You can't tell anyone, you can't trust anyone, and you can't tell your friends, your instructors, and you can't trust anyone." This is at 1 hour, 8 minutes, and 21 seconds. You can hear the concern in her voice, and this quote represents the dangers of being divergent because people don't know what to do with them. If Triss was found out as a divergent, she would be tested on and killed. This makes her feel alone and scared because she is in constant danger and she has no one to tell about her problems. She has to pretend to be fully dauntless in order to stay safe. In conclusion, through Marxism, Hamlet and Divergent show parallels through class structure and struggle, rebellions, and alienation. Both Hamlet and Triss show their hero's journey through their stories in different ways. Hamlet does everything selfishly and cowardly, and opposite to how Triss is brave and selfless. Although both are very different, they both feel alienated by the people around them.